Okay, we are live. Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and welcome back to a brand new movie review. I'm Chris Garner, joined today with George Aldridge and Tayte here to talk about Christopher Nolan's latest film, the war epic that is Dunkirk. The first part of this review is going to be spoiler-free, although it's based on real-life events. So if you don't know about those events, go get some education, go read a Wikipedia article, and come right back to us. Second half will be spoilers, but we'll let you know when we get to that. Boys, it's here. Brand new Christopher Nolan film. It's not every day we get one, but when we do, oh boy, do we have something to talk about. How are we doing tonight, guys? How are you doing?
I'm probably doing better than you two. But I guess that's for my own way. How are you doing, Tate?
I'm doing okay at the moment. I am slightly tired, but I'm sure I'll get through this.
That's fine.
Okay, so I guess we're kicking off with, before we go into our review, we're all Nolan fans on this channel. George is probably a different kind of Nolan fan to us. The picture they uploaded on the group chat of Nolan like some kind of messiah figure. Guys, what are your thoughts on Nolan? And then we'll get into Dunkirk more.
Sir Christopher Nolan, to be come the New Year honours when he's done everything. I've talked many times, and people know my story many times, that Star Wars is what got me to film, blah, 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 blah. And we haven't really talked about it much, to be fair. Certainly, I'd say that's a year or two, we really haven't spoke. But he was the kind of director that got me, like, really into film. And that was The Dark Knight. I'm not going to hide that fact. People probably try to say, oh, it was Memento, but fair if it was for you. But when I saw The Dark Knight, that changed everything for me. And I really just took another step into watching film and looking at it, that sort of thing. And since then, I've been, he's my favourite director without a shadow of a doubt. I am a fanboy, I will happily say that. I was honoured to have met him. I may have fanboyed and shouted hero when he turned around after we got a picture together. It was honestly one of the greatest moments of my life, and I was gutted I couldn't be at the premiere for this one. But I know you hate Dark Knight Rises, Chris, but to me, he hasn't made a bad film. I won't lie, I haven't seen Following or Insomnia yet. I wanted to get around to them, but we couldn't do the reviews first, and I'm going to keep hold of them to watch on a Nolan marathon one day very soon. But he's someone, and I think this represents the opinion of many people now, that he is an A-list director. And when I say A-list director, if he's got a film coming out, it markets itself on the words Christopher Nolan, and you aren't just going to know you know you're going to get a good film, and it's an experience, and it's excitement, it's hype, and that sort of passion is now of directors anymore. We live in an era where everything is franchise, everything is sequel, reboot, cinematic universe, this, that, the other. You'd get excited for the new films. Very often now, it's like, oh, there's a new Scorsese film. Oh, okay, you don't get that as much as you used to. Whereas now, it's like there's a new Nolan film coming out. It's refreshing to get that one of the real auteurs back on the big screen doing a war film. One of my favourite genres. Again, something I haven't spoken about too much on the channel. About the brackets, I get very passionate about war films, especially when it comes down to talking history on war films. But the day they announced Nolan on a war film, I was in.
Mm-hmm. Tell you how about you?
Personally, for me, Nolan, he's always been a director who I've quite liked the films of. I've probably seen exactly the same films that George has seen as far as the Nolan catalogue. I haven't seen Insomnia. But yeah, other than that, I'm not like an overly hyped one. Like I enjoy his films. I enjoyed The Dark Knight Rises as well, Chris. I can continue watching it. In fact, it's on my DVD shelf here, and I believe I bring this up every single time. But it's going to continue sitting there. Any reminder to get you. And do you know what? We recorded some reactions today, Chris, and it was there. And you didn't burn it. You didn't steal it and throw it away or anything, or destroy it. So you mustn't hate it that much in the end.
I clearly don't hate it enough to own it, because I do. I bought it to complete my Batman collection, but that's neither here nor there.
On the flip side, George's relationship with Christopher Nolan is a complicated one. If he could, he'd probably ask him out on a date. Who knows?
He is someone, right? I don't know if you guys have. If someone says, "Okay, you've got 5 people in the world you can invite to a dinner," he is one of my 5. If for curiosity's sake, Lewis Hamilton, George Lucas, Harrison Ford, and someone else would make up the rest of that 5.
But anyway, yeah. So I'm impartial to Christopher Nolan. He's made some good films, so usually expect higher of him, and it will continue to rise in that way.
Yeah, for me, the only film I haven't seen of his so far is the following. And you guys have set it up, and if anyone's watched the channel before, you know that I am not a fan of The Dark Knight Rises at all. That to me has been his one bad movie. Well, like, made, I guess, in terms of scope, but I just think that film's a mess and a bit of a slap in the face from his previous Batman films. So Interstellar for me was that film that was almost like an apology piece, and because he was my favorite director for a time. Like, the films he was bringing out, he was just knocking them out left, right, and center. Then Dark Knight Rises took a massive dip for me, and then with Interstellar, it's been like on the build back up, and that's no exception with Dunkirk. So the trailers came out for this thing, and there really weren't that many. I think there was probably 2 that I can remember. There may have been a third, but to my mind, there were 2 big trailers for this. Mostly what I got at the cinema were very short 10-second TV spots almost. That's really all I got. That was your lot for Dunkirk. And I think we all knew that this was going to be something special. This was Nolan's first war movie, and we wanted to see. He's taken on all these genres now. Like, he's done sci-fi before, he's done superhero, and war was that one big genre that he hadn't tackled yet. And I think we all knew that it was going to be something memorable and something big when it came out. And it's actually been, although it's sitting on, I think it's like 92% at the minute on Rotten Tomatoes, this film. I think from the reviews I've seen, it's a very divisive film. And I think mostly that's down to overseas. It's going to be interesting to see how this film does overseas. I've seen one reviewer in particular call this no more than British propaganda, which it really isn't. But yeah, no, if I'm going to go into overall thoughts based on trailers, I thought the trailers were great. I thought they sold the film, and you could tell kind of the structure. They even used the soundtrack in there, which I wondered if that was going to be how the sound of it was. We'll talk more about that later. But yeah, and my thoughts of the trailer mirrored into the film. How about you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed the trailer. It wasn't a Nolan's best trailer, shall we say, going into his films. I much preferred the Inception or Interstellar trailers, but there wasn't really much revealed in these trailers. It's very difficult with films that have actual events taking place, because revealing the plot is like just revealing the history, and you can go and research that yourself. Which is why in autobiographies, when you see like key events of things taking place, you can recognize it. However, they won't tell you the entire story because it's something that you may see in the film, you may not see in the film. But yeah, like, I was excited about this film. The trailer was like satisfying enough. The music maybe wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be from the trailer, but as soon as I saw the film, like, the film was just completely beyond the trailer.
Going in the trailers, I mean, I think there was a teaser one, which was the one of on the mold where, you know, it's a teaser. It did its job, and that was okay. You know, at the end of the day, you know, you're sold before this film's in production. You want to see the trailer, see how things are going. And I think I was on the reaction for the very first official one, which dropped on the day Rogue One came out with you, Chris.
Yeah.
And it wasn't his best trailer, and I was still hyped. But I was there like, I'm not sure how that's going to sell it to a lot of other people. But then when that second trailer came out, it must have been like March or something. That was the one with the planes, the tents, everything. And you can tell how much further down in post-production, these guys were to drop that trailer. That's when you knew what you're going to get. And there's a reason that's the trailer that stuck with you at cinemas showing for the future, because that was really the great one. And then obviously the film itself came out. And what I will say about the marketing, every single bit on Facebook, Twitter, I've seen from the official Dunkirk stuff, I've never seen IMAX plastered over a film more than this. Mm-hmm. Even Interstellar had that reign for a bit, but this film has swept it. And you know what? Just off a brief, I mean, we've all seen at IMAX. So you guys, I think Chris is your first. We'll speak about that very shortly. But I trekked to London to the Leicester Square IMAX, which I think is the second or third biggest in England now, and it was worth the trek. And hopefully, very hopefully, next week we'll see it in film on 70mm, because that's obviously a big talking point. But I've seen it twice now, twice in IMAX, and I know I'm going to end up buying it on Blu-ray and stuff, but I will not be seeing this at a cinema that isn't IMAX. It wouldn't feel right. And at least with the IMAX and Blu-rays, they managed to get the bars up to the levels that you see on screen. But just before we start anything, IMAX is, go for it. You got to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so actually, one of the big things that because me and you saw it together, Tate,
Yeah,
at
we
the
did, yeah.
IMAX. One of the big things we were talking about after the film had finished were, will this film have the same impact once we do buy it on Blu-ray and watch it on a home system? Unless you've got like 4K surround, like the best
Yes.
pinnacle of surround sound, will this movie be even good to watch another time? And I think it will obviously still be good, but I think the experience of the way that you see this film really does play into your enjoyment of this one. And my enjoyment of the actual quality of this movie from a technical level in terms of the IMAX system is very sort of up in the air with this one. So as you said, it is my first IMAX experience, and really with a screen that size, as soon as I walked in, I thought, this is what it's all about. I can understand why people go the extra mile to go and see things in IMAX. We were relatively close to the front, so there really was no peripheral vision in terms of the camera, the screen. We were in it. And, you know, like the sound in the trailers was playing, and I thought, okay, this isn't really too dissimilar to my local cinema. And then it plays like a little demonstration of what the sound is capable of. It does like a demonstration of like a plane landing, of an explosion, of like a helicopter or something. And that was where I was like, okay, we're getting into it now. And the actual sound of war, essentially, in this film is by far the standout for this film. When that first gunshot goes off, and it was so loud in there. Like, I thought John Wick 2 was the loudest film I'd ever see at a cinema this year. Dunkirk has topped it tenfold. When that gunshot went off, I think everyone jumped in the cinema. I thought someone was actually firing a gun in the audience. It sounded like it was right next to my ear. The sound of the planes, everything like that. When they're coming in to land or when they're coming in to attack, the chairs were vibrating. It felt like you were part of the movie. It was like almost like a 4D experience. So all that stuff, great. My one problem that I had, and it's going to be interesting if we do see this on 70mm IMAX, was the actual sound quality of the dialogue. I've always said the sound mixing with Nolan films, in terms of seeing them at the cinema, for me has been really poor. And I can't remember which was the first movie that I noticed that from his. Maybe Inception, maybe Dark Knight Rises. I don't know. There's been elements in most of them. Maybe Dark Knight as well. I heard about 5% of the dialogue in this movie. Now, this movie doesn't have much dialogue anyway, so you can tell what's happening in the movie without having the crutch of the dialogue. But there were a lot of moments where I was leaning forward to try and really concentrate on what was being said, and I did miss a lot of it. And it sounded like the music and the actual background noise of the film was cranked to 11, and the dialogue was trying to like cut in over it, and I really struggled to make it out. So I'll be seeing it again at a regular Odeon cinema on Tuesday. I'll be seeing it again, hopefully with you, George, at another IMAX. So I'm hoping for a different experience. That was the one area of the film that let me down.
I'm thinking they're going to be completely different experiences, personally. I mean, like, I'm going ahead with the knowledge that I have seen this film in IMAX. I am never going to watch this at home. That's one thing that I can immediately kind of think of. But it should have rescreenings in the future. It Oscar really should, season. Especially coming towards Oscar season. But even if that was the case, I would only ever see this film in IMAX or even a cinema, because you need this. It's a spectacle-based film, and I'd say that for exactly the same for Inception. Maybe in Inception and in Interstellar, there is a bit more kind of storyline to go along with this, and there is a bit more dialogue, and there is a lot more to talk about and discuss. This film is just plain as you like. It is there. And because of that, I feel like it's one of those films where don't wait for it to come out on DVD. You have to watch it in a cinema.
Yeah, and what I will say, but you guys, this is people that are in it. I always get not triggered, but I always like to know people's thoughts before we do the reviews, because I can get I tend to think the worst. I think there's been since The Force Awakens, I've been like traumatized of how we react to films, and you guys wouldn't say anything, and I just took it on that you didn't like it, and then I think I kept spamming you with trying to get more details, and I got one out of Chris, whereas I need to watch in subtitles, and I was like, shit, like. So I started searching audio because I didn't have any problems myself. But what you guys said, I'm not going to say this as a bad screening. It might have been like that for all I know. That's why I'm intrigued to see it again with you guys. But I did search on Twitter, and I found one person out of dozens and dozens of tweets that had the audio sound mixing problems. But that's what's going to make it interesting watching it all for a third time or fourth time by the time the day comes. But yeah, you cannot. I mean, I'm going to buy this on Blu-ray. I mean, to be fair to Nolan, like, as a guy that despises well, no, I'm not going to say that at all. But as someone that is a cinematic, I like to go to the cinema to watch my films, the cinematic experience. Anyone wants to do a bit of research? Netflix loyalists are triggered this week because Christopher Nolan's told them that Netflix is pointless. You want to watch films at the cinema and have an experience, not at home in your bedroom. I love how he triggers people. But anyway, I'm gonna buy it. It's a Nolan film. It's gonna have a 4K release. He's all behind 4K, so it will be something very different watching that at home. I don't think I've ever seen Interstellar at home though, which is actually phenomenal. Now I think about it, I've seen it I think 4 times each at the cinema, and including Interstellar Live, which was amazing. But one thing I will say about this film, of the whole audio stuff, it does play like a silent film, and I think one of the beauties of that is the fact that the film is split into 3 narratives, which I guess we can start going into it now with. I'm just going to say we're not splitting the review in 3, but we kind of are, just for like plot, characters, and basic set pieces, what we want to talk about for each section. So even as we're on the screen, part 1, The Mole, which is 1 week. People that haven't known by now, who have kept away from the internet, anything human beings, we've got 3 narratives, 3 different time periods, all interweaving with one another. And obviously, like this type of film would do, to all cliche boom at the end together. And we have the Mole, which is a week, which is the beach. We have the sea, which is 1 day, which is obviously on a boat. And we've got the air, which is 1 hour, which is obviously on the planes, because you can't use a boat in the air and you can't use a Spitfire in the water. And this isn't James Bond. So shall we begin with the Mole, which is the main one?
Yeah.
There's.
Oh, go on.
Do you want me to go for it?
Yeah.
There's. I mean, it's really hard to talk about plot and spoiler free of this, because it's so simple a plot. They're trying to, evacuate the beach and get back to England. The armies are. It's so hard to talk about. It's trying to pretend that you don't know anything about history as well. Like,
okay, I can say that they had various different hazards on the way. From the very first minute of the film, they are immediately like in a struggled area, and you immediately feel the sense that they are running desperately out of time, and time being a huge part of this film. You start to hear the ticking almost immediately, and that kind of plays through, and it starts to get into your head, and it always keeps you on edge. And I feel like this one was probably the most intense because it was the closest to line of fire. The dog fighting in the air sections, I would say, was probably second closest. And then the sea was a bit calmer. However, it was still intense. They still kept a level of intensity. And as soon as they because these 3 time periods, which is set across, which is 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week, they all interweave at one point, which, I mean, I guess you'd expect at the start of the film. But when it happens, it's just the intensity just goes way up into the ceiling. It's incredible.
Mm-hmm. And I like when we heard about this structure thing, I guess we should have predicted it because it's Nolan and he always likes to experiment with time and narrative. The time around his narrative, when it comes to his films, and I guess that was just part and parcel of his legacy of films. But I love when we first heard that it was going to be set in the 3 different perspectives, and we were all saying, well, we're going to have an hour dedicated to this, an hour to that, an hour to that. And we really don't. Like, it's one of his shortest films. I know his shortest is probably The Following and then the short film he made. This has to be like a close second in terms of that. I think it runs at about an hour 45, hour and 47 minutes, which is incredible. But I think that this film is the right length. And I like that he does tell it from the different perspectives. I think that was necessary. Each one is different in their own way. And going sort of what Mark Commode says in his review, that Christopher Nolan makes these blockbusters, makes these big films, but he doesn't talk down to his audience. He expects you to keep up, and we can keep up, and that's something that we can do. And I liked that some people watching it, I mean, it outlines it at the beginning anyway with the captions, number 1, the Mole, a week, so on and so forth. But even when you watch it, I could imagine some people might be a bit lost and trying to piece it together. You see characters crop up in different timelines at different periods of their own personal journey throughout the evacuation of Dunkirk. But it all makes sense. It's like Pulp Fiction. When you watch that, you might have to watch it a second time to really place how everything follows after one another. But you can do it. And I like that he's structured in that way. It didn't seem like, oh, it's a Nolan thing, he has to do this. It felt like it was necessary to tell the story he wanted to tell.
Yeah, and I think the running time was, when I first heard it's 1 hour 45. I wouldn't say I was heartbroken, but I was kind of there like, but why? Like, war films are like 2.5, 3 hours long. It's a Nolan film. Why is it like half the length of some of his others? And when you're watching it, and I was there like, Christ, this is an hour longer. Like, I'd probably piss or shit myself. Like, you are on the edge of your seat from the first like 20 seconds, and it doesn't change. There was someone next to me in my screening today that decided to get out a sandwich in their meal halfway through the screening, and I am there like, how can you eat? Like, how are you not literally like sitting there? Because I don't think I've had an experience like this before at the cinema, where I've been gripped from that opening scene to the end. And by gripped, I don't mean that I'm intrigued. That happens with a lot of films. I mean, I am literally there, like eyes glazing, nothing else is getting in my way, not even the drink or anything like that. I wanted to, I was on this thing. And the stuff with the beach, I mean, it is great that the opening scene sets the tone. You get the flyers and the trailers like, you are here. We surround you. That's all you need to do. And it's exactly what Mark committed, what you said as well. If you went and gave, like, you could have lost 3 minutes of the film by them talking about, oh no, we are surrounded by Germans, they're getting closer, we have to get home. It would dampen the film. Just go in, set the scene, and just go for it. And that's exactly what this film does, and that's a credit to it, because I can imagine a lot of other films doing something like that. And when you look back to Saving Private Ryan, obviously you get the opening scene, but it goes straight to D-Day. There's no, we're going to prepare to go to war, to prepare to get on the beaches. There's none of that nonsense. They go straight into D-Day. And, it makes all the difference in the world, because if you get logged down with other stuff, it's really going to have an impact. But with this, it goes straight in. And almost the first, 15 minutes are pretty much a silent film. There's maybe a couple of lines of dialogue, if that, but it's not major.
Is it weird that this film is going to be competing at the Oscars against possibly The Darkest Hour? Which is a torture film based around the same kind of events.
No, I think this film, not. This is me being me. This is me who always says war films always win Oscars. I even said that to you guys when we did Oscar predictions. That's why Hacksaw Ridge took them. They offered this film for Nolan to come out at the end of the year. He said no. He wanted it out in July. If this come out in December, we'd be talking about it in December, but it's out now. It's ready now, and I can tell you this is going to win a minimum of 6. This is going to take both sounds. This is going to take soundtrack. This is going to take cinematography, best director, hopefully best picture. This isn't me on a high horse.
We could very easily talk about the different
it's so early.
Will or will not win. But personally, I think that there are two soundtracks which might possibly go past it, in the shape of The Last Jedi and Blade Runner. But yeah, the soundtrack was good. Are we talking about that in spoilers or not?
We do it at the end of this bit. That's why you're going off on a waiver for Oscars, but it's going to sweep the technicals, and that's evident from the first couple of scenes. But I will say we kind of should talk about like I said, it's hard to talk about the opening stuff because it is the evacuation. But we do have a couple of characters, and the credits, they don't necessarily. I mean, some of them get names, but in all honesty, there's not any focus on the names. They don't learn each other's names and stuff, and I've just called it. We have, Tommy, who's the main one. All I can say is he's not Harry Styles, because he's a newcomer. Like most of the cast, they're all newcomers. Nolan was very evident in the sense that I want young actors. I want them to be unknowns, because in World War II, a lot of them were very young, and so I need them for this film. I forgot who plays him, Theon, I think. Then we've got a character called Gibson, who's again another unknown on the beach with them. Then we've got Alex, who is I almost call him One Direction, who is Harry Styles. And I guess the only other character of importance with the beach stuff is Commander Bolton, aka Gilderoy Lockhart. So Kenneth Branagh.
I really wanted his theme song when he showed up. Completely clashed with the rest of the movie. I don't care. It's his theme song to me.
It's what I like, and this is a testament to the film. Almost all of the younger known actors have a kind of stellar sort of reputable actorate, and that sounds really weird, but for 3 newcomers, you've got Kenneth Branagh, a knight of the British Empire. I believe he's probably won an Oscar or 2. I actually need to research that. But then even with the boat stuff, when we get to that newcomers, then we have, why do I just forget his name? Mark Rylance. Then even the planes, well, technically there's only 2 of them. You've got Tom Hardy.
Yeah.
what he does with the sort of the experienced cast and the young ones, it works really well with each other. That's one thing I will say about the characters. But in this, I guess, in all honesty, I would just outright say that I think all the characters, like, they were all good performances. But obviously, all the talk is on Harry Styles because it is Harry Styles' first film, and you know what? He was good in it. I've said it.
And
Oh,
sorry, go
I
on,
was
Tayte.
going to say, I can happily say that he was possibly even the best actor in it, which is surprising. I believe one of my friends made the joke of, well, he's got to be good at something because he's crap at singing. But at the same time, it's unusual because you paint him as a celebrity that you don't really like. I didn't like him purely because he got famous for a reason which I just don't believe in. The whole kind of reality TV show style, talent show type thing. Especially when it's so set up, like the X Factor and stuff like that. Also, the way that kind of they conduct themselves as people, I do not agree with it. However, I can give credit where credit is due, and this film, it wasn't. He was given the most amount of lines, and the way he delivered them was as a professional would do. So I am impressed.
Yeah, and it was funny, like on the way out when you could hear like other conversations going on reviewing the film. He was like the first actor people were talking about. Like, forget your Kenneth Branaghs, forget your Mark Rylance's. Yeah. Harry Styles was the one that everyone was talking about. I thought he was good. I thought he was fine. But as George said, like, if I'm going to be talking about this film and what its legacy is going to be, it's going to be down to technicals. Now, this isn't necessarily a negative for me. This is just something I've seen on different reviews. So as soon as this film finished, actually, no, before I went to see the film, I did cave in and I did watch two reviews. Two of the movie reviews that I watch is Chris Stuckman and Jeremy Johns. Chris Stuckman, glowing review. Jeremy Johns had a lot of reservations about the film. He said that he wasn't emotionally invested in it. It didn't focus on character. And we said this as well, Tayte, and I think you mentioned it before, that it's the event, like it's the action climax almost of the event. You are in that situation with people, doesn't really bog itself down with, you know, setting up characters. I was fine that it didn't do that because it was the kind of war movie where you see everyone as essentially a number.
Yeah.
And that they're all there. It's just this desperate scramble for survival. You don't get bogged down with, although some characters are named in it, they're not mentioned enough for you to remember them. Would I have liked this movie more had we have had about 45 minutes at the beginning setting all these characters up? A little bit more about their backstory, a bit more foundation for then moving into the rest of the film? Maybe, because I will say that I never had a big emotional reaction at this film. It was intense. I was gripped. I was on the edge of my seat. I was glued to the film beginning to end, but I didn't feel anything from it. I didn't get emotional as I did from other war movies. Like, I mean, I don't really like Saving Private Ryan as a movie. I think the first 25 minutes are incredible, some of the best filmmaking in history. The rest of the film I don't really care for. But like Hacksaw Ridge, for example, I was emotionally invested in that, and I can't say I was the same with this movie. Not a negative. I know that what Christopher Nolan was trying to do, as I said, like every soldier is a number, but it does make me wonder what this could have been like had we have had that extra time to set these characters up, to get a little bit, to get to know them a little bit more, to know their names and things like that. I don't know if that would have served the film better or if that would have weakened it.
I personally, normally that's something I'm behind because it is important to get characters set, but I made the point, I think I was chatting to Tayte before we hit record about Saving Private Ryan, and I mean, it is, well, until 2 days ago, it was my favourite war film of all time, and nothing will ever compete to the opening scene. Problem with Saving Private Ryan is at the end of the film, every single character from the main squad has a backstory. You know their backstory. I got to go into my mum. I got to go into my dad. I want to go into my wife. I'm a teacher. I got to get back to my family and my brothers. The problem with Saving Private Ryan is not only do they lose time, but it suits backstories because it's about a single squad. When you've got three narratives weaving with one another, and it's the whole point that every single person's got to get home. Sometimes less is more, and we do get background on some characters as the films do progress, and certainly I'd say more in the boat situation it works better than the others. In this one occasion, and I do think it's because of how the film started with the intensity right to that final scene, I agreed with how they did it, because I think if you would have lost a minute or two of the sort of edge of your seat stuff, then I really feel that it would have dipped the rest of the film, or certainly the rest of a third of the segment. Whereas when we did get the backstory, it fitted in and it felt natural for the scenes they did it with. But I completely get what you mean, and I have seen people say that, and that has been one of the criticisms.
Yeah. But
I think that's where some of the divisive stuff does come in, because some people want that. Whereas seeing it, I mean, if someone said to me before the film, you're not going to learn most of these characters' names, you're not going to know any of their backstories, I'd be, well, that's a bit odd. But having seen it, I'm kind of like,
it's a war
it was
film,
a risk.
So you kind of expect it.
Yeah, it was a risk. And I mean, I haven't seen Hacksaw Ridge. I wanted to watch it yesterday, but I ended up watching half of Logan instead. That's my bad. But, you know, that is a sole protagonist about him, and he does need that build-up.
Yeah.
And with this, because you've got so many people, it adds to the stakes not knowing more. Because if you've got the whole, my wife is 6 months pregnant, I just want to get home to her so I can have the baby with her. You know that they're going to focus on him for a device to see if he's going to die or live. Yeah. And that takes you out of the rest of the squad. But by having none of them with a backstory, I think that really did help.
Mm-hmm. With no one and with a backstory, it is anyone can drop at any moment. And the two themes I reckon they take into this film are, I'd say, isolation and desperation. With the beach, I would say the isolation is the vast isolation. They're completely surrounded. They have nowhere to go. With the air, you're isolated within your own capsule and you've got to defend a certain area. With the boat, I would say less of isolation of where they were, but more of isolation of, because it's a civilian boat, and they explain this kind of towards the start, they have no idea really what they're doing in that situation. They have a clue of, let's try and save as many people as possible. But as soon as any sign of trouble arises, that one becomes kind of the more intense story, and they're always kind of climbing on top of each other for the intensity and always kind of jumping up and down, which I really liked, because I thought if they're going to have three stories, there's got to be a good balance. There can't be this one was the worst story, this one was the best story. They've all got to be equally as good as each other. And I feel like they did the balance very well there. As far as desperation, one of the reviews that we have seen after this was beyond the trailer review. I know that George and Chris are going to go watch that through again afterwards. I'm probably going to. Yes, but one of the things that they said in that was they couldn't believe how British soldiers were painted in what they would say was a bad light, and how all of the British soldiers weren't painted immediately as heroes. And in response to this, I would just love to say that this is realistic. This isn't your happy-go-lucky American Pearl Harbor-esque film where there's got to be some kind of love affair on the beach before they get out. This is a war film. This is the most desperate situation. This is the darkest hour. This is the darkest week. This is the darkest day in these people's lives. And this is about the human spirit and the need for survival in the desperate, sparse situations they are in. This isn't some happy, pretty war film. This is a war film, and it perfectly plays that.
The other thing with Dunkirk, getting with the real-life history as well, it was a loss for the British...
Yes.
Well, I can't really say British Empire, but, you know, this whole... I mean, it's not a spoiler that it was a loss. They're evacuating off the beach for a reason, because they're losing the war. They have to get home. And they're not going to paint it up with Union Jacks everywhere and have them cheering every 30 seconds, painting a portrait. You know, there's not a Michael Bay slow-mo for the flags to come in. No, this is realistic. I mean, would an American like a film about them losing Vietnam? No, they wouldn't. And they would moan that it wasn't patriotic enough. But one thing as well, I will say with this, I mean, I saw Nolan's interview with Simon Mayo today, and he said, you know, this is a British film with an American budget. And he was very adamant to these producers that I will have an entirely British cast. Similar to Harry Potter films, I think there's a very odd but similar comparison that they are British films with British filmmakers, British casts, with that American budget, because they've obviously got... Harry Potter had the books, the success with them, the money to come. Christopher Nolan has his sole reputation. I wouldn't say it's on the line because, I mean, it wasn't a reputation on the line. Warner Bros. Were desperate for him to make this film for them. They gave him $20 million plus 20% of whatever money this film makes. Judging off the opening weekend, he's pocketed himself another $20 million on top of the first 20. It worked for what it was, and it doesn't need to be happy-go-lucky. And I saw a Mike Ryan's interview today where he says, you know, the best thing about being PG-13 or 12A is that this is discouraging children from watching war films thinking they're fun. Basically, to the Call of Duty kids, this is a bit of reality. It's not games. You don't get a second life. When you die, you die. And he didn't say it like that. Obviously, he didn't say that at all. But there is that reality in it.
That would be very brutal to say to kids, I'm not going to lie.
Yes, it would be.
It's like looking at a kid in the eye just saying, this is war, son. You are going to die.
But the thing with that, it's so true, though. Like, this film could be, like Nolan, he's amazing. Like Dark Knight, he can do that implied violence to a 12A that not many other people can do. And it shines in this. There is a drowning scene late in the film, which is pretty brutal, which I'm not going to go into details on now. But, you know, this isn't a pretty film. This isn't got bright, lively colours, the blue sea, the blue sun, the white clouds with the sun bearing down on Spitfires as they fly away into the sunset. No, this isn't that kind of film. This is them flying into war. And, you know, this is why. And going to the boat story, that's why, you know, Cillian Murphy's character is literally called the Shivering Soldier in the script. From the trailers, you know, he doesn't want to go back. He won't go back. And that's a big part of this. He is shell-shocked. He's going to, obviously back then PTSD wasn't a thing, but that's clearly what he has done. And, you know, it's not nice. You know, in an American film, he'd pick the soldier up on the boat and goes, yes, we'll go back to Dunkirk and we shall fight them and take the shores. This isn't that kind of film at all. This is what happened. And, you know, shell shock was a major thing in both world wars that have happened since. Both world wars, shell shock happened to a lot of survivors from said wars, fetched them a lot. And you know what? Thinking back to it, I'm trying to sit there thinking of how many big budget war films do we actually see an example of any of this? Because normally we don't. And what I did see was a brilliant comment someone made to Christopher Nolan. Says, "Are you going to do a Battle of Britain film next? Because it's nice to get war films that aren't from Steven Spielberg making out the English army to be a joke." And other things which I can't talk about. But yeah.
To your point about the color palette, that, you know, in this film there isn't bright and lively colors. To be fair, this is a Christopher Nolan film. When has that ever been the case with the rest of his movies? Not a bad thing. That's not what I'm saying at all. And going back to like Tate's sense of hopelessness, what made this event more hopeless was the fact that they could see home. This wasn't like stuck in the middle of nowhere, no man's land, just absolutely hopeless. There was hope. It was right there across the water. They could see it on the horizon. They just couldn't get to it. And I think that's what plays into this movie a lot more. I did, however, want to touch on George's point there about the violence in this film, the implied violence. And me, Tate, and your dad, Tate, were talking about the violence in this film and how, personally for me, like, I don't need blood, guts, and gore everywhere in my movies. I'm not saying that at all. However, I think that there was a slightly missed opportunity. Like, I did get the brutality, like the harsh conditions that these soldiers were faced with. But I would have liked to have seen a touch more violence in there just to really hit that home. When I'm thinking about war films, most shocking ones, I'm going to go with the two examples that I said before with Saving Private Ryan and Hacksaw Ridge. Hacksaw Ridge is a 15, but some of the stuff in that is incredibly difficult to watch, and you really do see the brutality of war. With this one, you see the bad conditions and the futility of war and the absolute just like military disaster and you know, in their skewed line of thought. Like, there's a line of dialogue in this film where it says that they don't want to risk extra ships and planes to get them back because they need them for the war effort. Had we have seen more shots and a little bit more viscera, maybe, I think that would have added to the experience. I don't think it would have cheapened it. I don't think the film's still fantastic, but I think it would have added that extra level to it and a bit more of a hopeless state of the characters. Tate was talking, I don't know if it was you or your dad, Tate, was talking about when the German planes were flying overhead every day and just like pot shotting people and just killing people outright. Just in this, we see bombs dropped on them, but they would strafe across the beaches to the point where I think soldiers that have survived said we almost like wanted to catch a bullet just because we were done with the situations and the horror of having to witness that all the time. And I don't think that was really hit with this film. Maybe it would have done with a little bit more violence, but violence done in an effective way, not just a gratuitous way just for the sake of it.
Yeah, I mean, the opening scene, it's not really a spoiler to say, but we get the bombs on the beach, and that's probably, in terms of violence, one of the,
as far as it comes.
Yeah, I mean, we get bombs dropping on people, and we literally see a guy lying down just fly up out of the lens. And when it wants to be violent, it does it. And personally, I feel, as great war films go, this was probably a lockdown condition of Warner Bros. Like, if you're going to make this film, it's going to be a 12A. That's personally how I feel, because all of it, I mean, I think, was the Prestige a 15? I can't quite remember.
I can
12,
find
I
out for
believe.
you.
I think it was 12.
But, you know, he can do dark things. And I feel that this was the main condition. This is what a lot of people have also thought, that, you know, had this been a 15, it could have been different. Not doing, it's exactly what you said, not dropping bombs and having blood for the sake of it, but just to add that bit more realism in it. But I personally feel that the 12A was a box office condition as part of the deal.
It was a 12.
Or was it 12?
Well, it's a PG-13 in America, so I'm assuming that's a 12 or 12A.
I think the only film that he's made a 15 might be Memento or Insomnia. I'd have to check those. What I did like in this movie, though, and we could talk about this and then move on to whatever we need to, is the actual scope of it. So here, I mean, in the plan, you talked about cardboard soldiers. I did not know that he did that, but that looks great. The fact that he had 6,000 extras, and this just speaks to Christopher Nolan, and this is why he's definitely one of my favorite directors. He doesn't pander to what everyone else expects in like the movie studio world. Like in other films, they do a wide shot. They'd have a few there, but they'd enhance it with CGI. And maybe that might have been the case for this, but so much of this film is just shot in camera. The fact that, and I guess you guys are going to talk about it more, he got real warships and Spitfires, and, you know, he strapped cameras to them. He crashed them into the water. There's only been a few films where I go and see them at the cinema, or even still watch them now, and I think, how, like, physically, how did someone make that a reality? How did someone make what I am witnessing now in this film a reality? I've had that with Lord of the Rings trilogy. I had that with Mad Max Fury Road. I can now say that I've had that with Dunkirk. Just some of those sweeping shots of the ships capsizing, of people inside, the editing as well. Lee Smith, he's been Christopher Nolan's editor since Batman Begins. This is probably up there with some of his finest work. His editing's always been good in terms of the narrative shifts, but in this, in the first drowning sequence, when, spoiler alert, I guess, a ship's hit with a torpedo, and the way that it's edited and the sound and the constant cut into black, you feel like you're in that water too and fighting to the surface with those soldiers. It is really, the scope of this film is incredible. And like you said, George, this is definitely going to be picking some stuff up, or should pick some stuff up come Oscar season for all the technicals.
The technical stuff was just insane. I mean, I've got it in the pan here, real fucking Spitfires on IMAX. Like, as a kid, and not because I'm British, but I always had I mean, not that I wasn't born in the 50s, the 60s. Obviously, I was born in the 90s. But over here in England, the hype of the Spitfires is like our plane. That is our thing. And, you know, it's always great seeing them on films, but seeing real ones being fucking flown, three of them at that together. I mean, it's in the first trailer, but seeing that on a
there
giant
is that proud
IMAX
moment in the film as well with Mark Rylance when he calls it out. And as a British guy, you kind of do have a smile, like.
I have a Murica moment right at the end, which I'll talk about in spoilers, but just seeing them just weaving in and out of dogfighting with each other, I just imagine being the editor that gets to watch all of that. Imagine being Christopher Nolan or Hoyt van Hoytma, who was allowed in, because they obviously Spitfires were redesigned for 2-seater seats for them to accommodate filming. Just like I think they now do these things like for $5,000 you can be flown in a Spitfire for 20 minutes, them sort of things.
Yeah.
And imagine being in that, being able to film this stuff. Like, boy, that's not just making a film. Like, that's having the time of your life. I can only envy the editing suite for looking at footage. But it was something that dogfights have been done before. But can you remember the last time you saw dogfights done on a scale like this? Certainly not a war film in my life.
No. Definitely not.
Maybe some of those old school films. I know the one that Tom reviewed, was it Wings? Apparently the plane sequences in that are meant to be really quite spectacular. But no, certainly in recent years, this is the best dogfighting stuff I've ever
What I will
seen.
say is Wings came out before World War II as well. But
yes. Oh, sorry, yeah.
But
you know what I mean?
Plane
combat.
It's something you don't see, but on this level, I mean, what I've also, I've just been doing some research that Christopher Nolan created. Well, obviously, he had people create for him, but he obviously helped it. He had specially created IMAX lenses, and they're called the snorkel lenses, which enable them to go underwater and stuff like this. And again, this guy isn't just big on IMAX and stuff. He is going the extra mile. He's creating IMAXs. I think I read in the news recently, I can't remember which director, but Chris Nolan lent him an IMAX to use for his film from his personal collection of IMAXs cameras. Like,
Jesus.
The fact he has a personal collection of them, you can just imagine going to like a room in his house and it's like the fucking like the Batcave, but just full of IMAX cameras everywhere. It's the way that this guy is doing great. And also talking about the water lenses, because we've spoken about the ships crashing, the boats sinking stuff. He chooses to put the cameras stable to the boat rigs rather than like many other films of sinking ships to the water. And it makes it so much more like terrifying that the water's coming up on the screen to take over, and something I haven't really felt like I'd seen before. But again, that's credit to him because it was a completely different option that added more to it.
Yeah, definitely. Right, I'm conscious that Tate, you might have to take off soon. So if we get through the last two big sections that we need to, and then me and George can handle spoilers if you need to. Shall we talk the soundtrack for this thing? So Hans Zimmer, once again in collaboration with Christopher Nolan, comes back to provide the score for this film. And as soon as we all knew that Hans Zimmer was going to be the one attached, but I think certainly me and you, George, were like being into our film music and scores and things like that, especially Hans Zimmer. I was really looking forward to what he'd produced for this movie. And I feel like a broken record right now because this is what I've been like with soundtracks for a good few years now, unless it's something special. It fits the film, but if you listen to it on its own, it's not a good soundtrack, in my opinion. I was hoping for Hans Zimmer to go. Not that I've hated Han Solo then, Jesus. Hans Zimmer's music in recent years, but it's not been as memorable or as listenable as certainly some of his older music. And I was hoping this was going to be a return to form. I wanted those sweeping arrangements. I wanted that, like the Thin Red Line. I wanted a soundtrack like that for this film.
I'd say that both Inception and Interstellar, the Nolan films, funnily enough, do have a soundtrack where you can listen to it and you can almost picture yourself watching the film.
You can.
This film, like, I tried listening to the soundtrack earlier on today, and yeah, no, I couldn't pick out what part of the film it was.
It's more ambience and like the sound of war. At least when I watched the film, there's a brief moment at the end when you see the ships all approaching Dunkirk, which is really the only moment I noticed where it kicked in, and a bit towards the beginning with violins when they're running with the stretcher. But beyond that, it was just kind of I couldn't tell where the soundtrack began and the sound from the actual events happening, like the engines and thing began and ended.
Describe it because I love the soundtracks I can listen to, and obviously I've gone out and bought this. I've been listening to this. I think experimental is maybe the one. I can't quite comprehend how to describe listening to it again because it feels like you're watching the film, which is a good thing. And I walked into work yesterday with it on, and I was kind of there, like, I feel like I should be fucking running to work right now. Like, it feels wrong that I'm walking at this pace. And even coming back from the cinema today, like, 'cause my mom's really big on Hans Zimmer as well, I've had the soundtrack on for the car for coming back. And it's like, we should be speeding on the motorway listening to this. It's a weird one because I don't think it's going to have the Nolan Zimmer films. I feel like it's going to be more like Batman Begins, in the sense that the soundtrack is more to the film and you remember the scenes, whereas Inception and Interstellar to me are two of the finest soundtracks in terms of listening to off screen. I think my mum has even seen Inception, and yet that's one of her favourite pieces of music at all in history. And it's an odd one because I completely get what you mean, and the experience into it at home is such that the film that the only one I can pinpoint a scene on now, having listened to it before watching it for the second time, is obviously the sort of the end credits, the boats on the shore. There's a very good chunk with oil, which I'm not going to go into details on because it's a spoiler for the story, and the opening stuff. And I don't know, I think it's a credit to the film that the sound is mixed so well between the guns, the bombs, that sometimes you don't know if you're listening to the score, if you're listening to the film. And that's a credit to watching it on screen. But over the coming days, I think we've had more time, so not think about it, but listen to it. And it's going to have a very different experience at home. And I feel that it's a soundtrack, that it's a phenomenal soundtrack, and it suits everything you see on screen. But the listening stuff at home will be very different to previous Nolan and Zimmer films. But I feel that due to it being experimental, a terrible term, there's probably a very good chance of it taking the Oscar because it is so different to his previous scores. That, you know, I've said before, I would love a Thin Red Line, especially as he's done a war film before. You're expecting strings of some glory and stuff like that, but there's none of that. And I'd say the standout song so far in the soundtrack is called the Supermarine. And for those idiots that suddenly think a Supermarine is like some super soldier, no, it's the name that comes before the Spitfire. So there's a bit of history for you all, but it's a very different soundtrack. I don't think I've ever heard Zimmer do something like that. Rush had an effect vaguely similar where, you know, the engine of the cars fueled some of the soundtrack, but it was nothing to an extent that this one did.
Yeah. Tate, do you have anything to say on it, or should we go to overall thoughts?
Yeah, the soundtrack wasn't too memorable for me myself. Nolan's soundtracks have been more memorable, but it fitted the film brilliantly. So I can't really fault it in that sense. But it's not one of those soundtracks that you go out and like buy, I'd say.
What I want to say is this is something that I found out, not through myself, actually through my dad doing research. Christopher Nolan gave his watch, as in the one he wears, to Hans Zimmer. And that watch was used for the ticking of the soundtrack and the entire film. Cool. And I'm there like, you know, you could use any watch in the world, but he sent Hans Zimmer his own one. The one thing I will say, the ticking is in the, I think, the second trailer. It's a big part of this, and it just raises the stakes. Similar to Baby Driver, completely different films, but because he has tinnitus, you have the ear ringing for the entire film, even when there's no music on, and it felt like that with the ticking in this, which was kind of cool to see.
Yeah. I was going to talk about the ticking, but I might save that for spoilers. I don't know if it's much of a spoiler, but I do want to talk about that ticking part towards the end of the film. I guess we'll go into overall opinions, and I'm conscious, Tate, that you need to take off. We'll move into spoilers after that, just me and George. So we'll start off with you then, Tate. Overall opinions on Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk.
Brilliant. A fantastic film. A must-watch for this year, but you have to watch it in cinema. Watch it in IMAX if you can. Watch it on the biggest screen with the best sound system you are able to get your hands on. It's a cinematic spectacle. It goes alongside films like Gravity, where you'd love to see it in cinema. It's amazing when you see it in cinema, and then as soon as you go home, you would never watch it again. This film, I think, has a bit more of a rewatchability value, but at the same time, this film was phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. George?
This is the second review in a row where I have called it the film of the year. I did say to Panavic, Dunkirk, you got to be something special to overtake it. I think Dunkirk is my film of the year. I mean, as someone that's a fanboy to Star Wars, I really struggle that I will see something. Obviously, I really hope that I see something better in the terms of I hope we get a great year for film, but a Christopher Nolan war film to my favorite genre, my favorite director. Together, it was everything I wanted it to be. It hit them expectations. It is a masterpiece, and I know a lot of people are chucking that term around with him. They have done his last couple of films, and this is the one. But I feel it's been almost unanimous between sort of the not the main critics, because I don't like that because there's so many forms of critics. Sorry, I'm coughing, but
That's right.
there isn't. It's really hard to go into final thoughts on it because you have, like what I said, you have to see the IMAX. You are doing this film no justice watching it at home. For those people that want to pirate films, could you imagine watching this on some crappy, blurry, 10-inch phone screen? No, this is something you've got to see as soon as you can, as quickly as you can, and you are going to be on the edge of your seat from the opening shot to the final shot. It is without doubt. I feel that it is his best film. I feel that it is a better made film than Inception, which is tough words. Tougher to say than it's a better war film than Saving Private Ryan. Time will tell, but I feel that both of them predictions will true. And like I said, you can only watch this film. It's so hard to talk about it because you can't. It's exactly what I messaged you guys. Bathe in its glory when you watch it for that first time, because I very much doubt you will get a cinematic experience like this again. Well, until he makes another film.
Yeah. I mean, I loved me War for the Planet of the Apes, man. I don't know. I'm going to have to give it time. I think I'm going to, for both movies, not just this one, to really see how I'm going to chalk this one up. I'm going to echo everything you guys have said. This is an incredible movie. I'm still thinking about it now, and the next time that I'm going to go and see it. Watch it on the biggest screen, as Tate said, best sound system you can. Hopefully one that has better audio in terms of the dialogue for your screening that I did at mine. In terms of where I, rank this with Nolan's other movies, I don't think it's my favorite movie that he's done by a long stretch. I think I still prefer Prestige, Inception, Batman Begins. However, I think this is his best film in terms of his directorial ability and his skill as a director. It's more just the film itself. I prefer the other ones I just mentioned. If you're going into this film expecting an incredibly emotional piece with characters that you can get behind, this might not be the war movie for you. It's a very different kind of war movie, though, in that it is almost like one big action set piece, but the urgency is there and the desperation, and that's what really carries this movie through. And you don't get tired with it. You don't get fatigued with it at all. You are there with all of the characters in the film in all the different situations. There's a different pace to each section, and you just get thoroughly swept up in it. And I can't wait to see this movie again. So yeah, that'll do it for our spoiler-free section of Dunkirk. And Tate, are we saying
yes? I'm gonna have
goodbye
to go.
to you right
Sorry,
now,
guys.
That's okay, no problem, man. Thanks for jumping on.
Brilliant.
Speak to you soon.
See you in a bit.
See you, man.
We will see you in another mixed-up timeline and coming together.
So spoiler section then. I'm going to pass back over to you for this one, because I don't know if you want to go through everything in the film or if there's really just key moments that you want to bring up, and we'll go from there.
It's such a hard one because we know the outcome that they're going to get home, but because he's created a fictional, it's not a fictional story, but because he's created fictional characters in a real story, he's been able to do his own thing. And so let's just hit it. The people on the beach, they're all going to go, wow. The people on the beach are going home. The people on the sea are going to get to the beach and bring them home. The Spitfires are guarding over the people on the beach and people trying to come home. There's your main, that's the Dunkirk evacuation. We go through the opening scene. Well, we're not going to, I say we just hit the key points of each story. Yeah. We'll start with the mole. One thing I want to say about the opening scene, you kind of said it earlier when that first gunshot goes off, like I literally crapped myself.
Yeah.
I did again today.
Jesus.
I was kind of, when you anticipate it and you can't, because it just lingers on them for so long, and then the gunshots start. It happened to me. It happened to other people, but
it's going to be one of those films, like as a kid, if ever like a scary moment happened or like a jump scare, I'd always watch it so many times so I could pinpoint the exact millisecond that it happened, so I could prepare myself. And I'm sure when I get this on Blu-ray, this film's going to be the case as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was the fact that it's probably at most, I don't know, it probably is IMAX more so than most, but the bullet flies above your head as well, so it comes from behind you. Mm-hmm. It's not like you're seeing someone in the corner of the room and they're hiding from it. And it sets what I will say, the opening scene, I personally thought that, like a stereotypical war film, this would introduce the entire squad for the guys that you're going to be following on the beach. I expected Harry Styles. They sort of linger on a couple of these guys. They're showing even one of them as a fag, something I haven't seen doing in film for a long time. There's more cigarettes in this film than women. There's nothing wrong with that. Again, it's a war film. But and then everyone dies except one, and it's brutal because, almost like the opening of The Dark Knight when they all die but one. That's how I felt watching it, because I think this was a kind of prologue, but it didn't really have like a big sort of push like the Dark Knight ones did. It sets the tone of what's going to come next. This is, the one thing I will say, and I left this with spoilers for a reason, we don't see a single German soldier in this, except the final scene where their faces are blurred, and there's only 4 of them. Chris Nolan made the conscious choice to do this because, it's a war film. Yes, there are the villains in it, but I personally think not only are you taking away the tension by showing a German lining up his gun before he pulls the trigger, you take tension out of that. So one example I always say is Saving Private Ryan. When Vin Diesel gets shot with the sniper, straight up, that's great. And it's terrifying. Then they go to the sniper after, it makes a point. But if they'd have never, ever showed that sniper, that would have been something else. And by not showing the Germans the conscious choice, it felt so, I don't want to say refreshing, but the fact we didn't have to go to the Germans in their cockpit shouting, the stereotypical, these are the really, really, really bad guys, they're Nazis, they're scum bags, blah, blah. That kind of thing you see in a lot of films. I think they're referred to once or twice as the enemy, and that's it. And it makes them, not only it makes them more of a threat, but it adds more tension to the story on the people you're watching.
I think they could have gone to your point about like editing in shots of them attacking. I agree it was right to leave them out because, I mean, one of the most intense sequences in the entire film is where the squad takes shelter in a boat and then they're getting shot at for target practice. They don't know if they're being shot at. They only clock on that it's target practice after about 3 gunshots go off. And that was one of the most intense sequences in the film. You don't see, they don't know where the enemy is coming from. You don't know where the enemy is coming from. And that was perfectly orchestrated throughout that. In terms of not showing an actual German soldier throughout it, I think that they could have done, because this is a film that, and when I show you that beyond the trailer review after this, you're just going to love it. But it shows just sort of, I don't know how to describe it, but no one's inherently good. Everyone's got their own, like, it's that desperation. And we see that from the opening scene with the French forces, how at first, like when I was watching it, I know they were being chased. I couldn't tell if the French were confused and had like shot at the English, like just out of desperation. But even when the main character makes it over into that barricade, they're all kind of scowling at him, and there's that tension there between them, even though they're on the same side. You get that with the English force later on. Again, on the flip side, when they're in that tanker and there's the Dutch guy and they're about to kill him, and when they think that the French guy is a mole, is a spy, and they want to throw him out there and sacrifice him. So you do get that element, and I wonder if you did introduce the German forces as that sort of morally. I know you want to keep them as the villain. I understand that, and it's not like World War I where that was just a futile war on all accounts. This one like had an agenda behind it. I think you could have done that, but I think it was right to just focus on what Nolan did. As I said, it's like a lean, mean war film. It doesn't bog itself down with unnecessary material when it doesn't have to. Yeah,
and I think that it's a risk. I mean, almost every film will do that, and there's no reason not to do that. It does work, but by that decision, especially when it's a film that it is, you know, it's nothing like Saving Private Ryan. I mean, the events. This is an evacuation. This isn't an attack. This isn't a defense. This is an evacuation, and you want to see what they're evacuating from. And that tension of them lurking, them getting closer as it's happening, that just adds so much more to what I think he's trying to accomplish to this as a film itself. And I can do nothing but kind of, you know, commend that. It's not only ballsy filmmaking, but I don't know, it was just something I didn't expect because it hasn't been done before. As simple as that. I mean, it probably has been done maybe once in the past, but not on a sort of a blockbuster film that everyone's going to see. That really did make that stuck with me for a long time. I think it will with others. Even at the final scene when Tom Hardy's burning the Spitfire. Oh yeah. They come on, you see 4 of them come on the hill, but then when they're with him, very briefly, every single face is completely blurred. They're out of focus. The only one in focus is Tom Hardy. And it worked. It just added that extra element. But that was the scene they were needed in because they had to establish that he's been taken as a prisoner of war. Yeah. And what I took away from this film, I mean, I'm going to go and see it again Tuesday, but moments in this film that have still stuck with me. So the first one we talked about was when the bombs go off on the beach and you just see the bodies just fly, and then people get up, carry on about their day, and the bodies are just left there on the beach. That was one. The other one, and probably the most poignant shot of the entire film, for me at least, was when that one guy just sort of gets up. I thought he was going to drown himself and just put himself out of his misery, where he just walks straight into the thing. But you can tell that he was trying to swim the crossing, like that level of desperation. And you know that he's not going to make it. You know that he's going to drown not too long into it. And then it cuts away from him and just cuts on like the vacuous expressions of the soldiers. That one really stuck with me. So although, as I said, like the violence isn't really in this film for the most part, there are still moments that do hit you in those places that, say, violent scenes do, but Nolan finds a way around it, and he does include shots like that. He doesn't stick with just like the urgent action barrage constantly. He does pepper in moments like this, which I think was important to do as well. Yeah, and I think with that scene, that is one of the most. I hate the word iconic. That's one of these scenes that people are going to come back to. And you know, I saw. I think he hired a historian that's published books on Dunkirk before, who he got advice from, and then he used him to meet other survivors and speak to them about the stories. It was from an eyewitness that they'd witnessed a guy try and swim the channel, and that scene there is because they watched it on the beach, them trying to swim off, and that the whole film is the desperation. And seeing that, I thought he was going to drown himself, but no, he just starts swimming, and he's not going to get there. But it just adds levels to the situation of what's happening, because not to hate on other war films, not hating on war films at all, you never really see desperation on a level like this. You certainly see it, and there's no credit without that. There are moments where this happens in many films, but I've never seen a film so desperate as this in that degree.
Mm-hmm.
That's from the first scene of them trying to, even when he's turning the tap on, trying to drink from a hose, from that minute all the way up to the end when they're getting beers, it's such a hard thing to talk about, because I felt like it was so fresh. Mm-hmm. Even though it's an established genre, it's an established director, there's something that felt so new about it, and that just added that extra elements. But yeah, what another thing on the opening scene? Let's talk about the, I don't know, what if you want to talk about in the mold? There's quite a bit, so it's trying to like phase it down, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm kind of jumping all around with this one.
It's a hard one not to jump around with.
Another shot that I really did like, and I didn't know it was, I should have thought it because it was in the trailer, but the scene where oil gets into the water at the end and it sets on fire, and you've got people trapped underneath the water, not wanting to go to the surface because they're going to get burnt because they're all covered in oil. That was incredible to watch. However, I will say there was 2 deaths in this film that I'm going to have to watch on a second viewing because I couldn't tell who died. The first one was when they're in the tanker that's being shot at and it's filling up with water, and one person doesn't make it out of that and they drown. I think that was the French guy.
Yeah, so his legs get tangled in chains. So when he's trying to pull forwards with his hands, he's trying to reach it, but you can hear like a chain tugging. So his legs got caught up, which is how he drowned.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And the other one was the guy who is under the water as the fire's raging and makes it to the surface, because I thought it was the main guy, but he was the one who was attached to Mark Rylance's boat, so I couldn't tell who that was.
I think it was the Scottish guy from The Force Awakens that says, "Tell that to Kanja Club."
Oh my God, was it him?
Yeah, it was him. I know. In the first time watching, I was like, he looks really familiar. I need to know what he's from. Second time, I think he looks at the end. I was like, it's Kanja Club Man, because it's obviously it's become a meme, and it was him.
Awesome.
It was him that's burning in the fire. What I will say, I'll save the oil for a bit later. I want to talk about do we talk about the Harry Styles instruction?
We talk about him, and then we can talk about Rylance if you want after that.
Yeah, it's the first kind of major set piece of the first boat going, and I think what struck me was when, he says, cut the lines. We can't have it go down like by the mold, because that's how we're getting people out of this situation. And it's just his face as he's watching all these people like drowning. Like, he looks so angry. I think he's probably in the top 3 performances of this film. And it's just his facial expressions. Like, if you think Tom Hardy can do with his eyes, this guy's doing it with his lips for the entire film. Kenneth Branagh, he's absolutely amazing. And you know what? He's probably perfect casting for the role they did for him. I probably couldn't have thought of anyone else that would have done that. I know other people would have. You could have stuck Gary Oldman in there or something like that, but it felt so new. And Kenneth Branagh's got that wit about him, the charm, but then he's got that serious side of when things aren't going right, that he has to come in and intervene. But just seeing some of these set pieces, knowing that these are real sets and these are practical effects. And I know this is always a talking point now, practical effects with CGI. To me, Christopher Nolan is one of the guys that is one of the reasons that practical effects became a thing again. Mm-hmm. Especially, I think one comparison I always make is in 2008, a film called The Dark Knight came out. They flip a bus, and it's a real bus. You wouldn't think it's something major because CGI can do so much more. But because you see it just adds that whoa moment. Whereas I remember in Terminator, do a bus flip, but it's in complete CGI, and you don't remember it, and it doesn't stand out because it's in a crap film, but B, there's so much of a CGI, there's nothing special about it. Mm-hmm. And just seeing these boats sinking, knowing that they were real. I mean, not that they bought the real like warships, but they were sinking real boats for these films. They're using models, a bit like how in the Titanic, he built the replica Titanic model for them to sink and do the set pieces with. That added so much more to this. And I think there's a scene when Harry Styles is introduced where, the ship's going to crush into the woods. As it does, you can just hear the faint screams of some people. Mm-hmm. And like I said earlier, implied violence, obviously that's something you don't want to see, but they're making it clear that was happening and that was a situation.
Yeah, and that scene from the trailer was one that I knew was going to be one of the most intense, when the boat's just getting ever closer and it's almost going to push them up against the side. I thought they'd dwell on that scene a lot longer than they did. There's only really a couple of shots of that moment, but yeah, no, that's stuff. And going back to Kenneth Branagh as well, as soon as you cast someone like Kenneth Branagh, before you even put them in the costume, give them the script, he commands so much respect and authority as an actor that it just made sense casting him completely. I thought he was great. I wanted to see more of him again, and I can say that for a lot of the things in this. Maybe it was just the hour 47 running time, but we know that Christopher Nolan doesn't like his extended cuts. He's very meticulous, methodical about his movies. He gets them planned down to the T. So we'll never see deleted scenes or anything from this movie, although I wish that we did.
What I will say on Kenneth Branagh, I don't know if I said it before we hit record to Tate or live earlier, but Chris Nolan did say he'd wanted to work with him for years, and he said he was in awe working with him, knowing he's a director as well. He probably thought there'd be a bit. He just said that, you know, he's wanted him. It says everything. If Chris Nolan wants you in your film, I mean, that's not just me being like bumming him and stuff. He's a director that not many people would say no to. Christian Bale, I would have come back had Christopher Nolan been directing Justice League or whatnot. You know, he's got a draw, and that's so rare nowadays. And you know, the best Scorsese, he works with the same people. Nolan uses the same people. Spielberg does the same people, because you know what you're going to get. They know it as well, so they would always go back. But it's great seeing new people doing it as well as the old ones.
So what you're saying is we can hope to see, well, hopefully, Kenneth Branagh in Christopher Nolan's next film, whatever that may be, after Dunkirk.
You know what, happily, because he would have finished directing Murder on the Orient Express. Why not? I mean, if he's wanted to work with him for years, maybe there were roles offered to him in other films that he wanted but couldn't take. I'd love to see them work together. And you know, what I did think is that, as him being a director as well, Chris Nolan kind of mentioned, you know, he was a bit nervous, he said, around him, because he's such a fantastic filmmaker as well. That added some more. And you know, Kenneth Branagh seems like a guy that I can guarantee you there'd be a couple of directors in the world where they'd come down and be like, "Oh, what? You can't do that. You can't do that. You can't do that." But I imagine him on set, them two just chatting about like what they're doing with their lives and how their day's been. He's not someone that's going to come onto someone else's project and dictate it, and I feel that worked wonders, because some people would do that.
Definitely. Man, this film's... I didn't know the spoiler section of this review was going to be as hard to do as it was, but I think we've covered most of the things on the beach now.
The final bit I will just say is the target practice scene. We kind of spoke about it, but when the first bullet went through, I was there like, oh my god. And then when you realize later on it's target practice, and then they go from rifles to machine guns, I don't think I've experienced something like that at cinema before, where every single bullet you think someone's going to go, and they start coming out the other side, then they accidentally like turn the boat on. Because I think the guy goes up a ridge, he's turned on before the bullets start, but they sway into the other half, which sets it off. And then obviously we don't see the Germans, but they clearly realise that they're actually all in there and they're trying to get away. So that's when they start shooting the machine guns. And I was there like, whoa, like it's such a hard thing to describe. I've never had tension at a cinema like this before. And there are tense films like what Tayte earlier, Gravity. I remember that being tense, but I was lost in that film halfway through when they brought back like some stupid visions and stuff like that. That faded quickly. And I think credit this, that the three storylines does help that interweave, because they'll leave this really tense moment, then they'll disappear to the other two storylines for 5 minutes, and then you're back straight away where it was. But then you're leaving the previous stories in a tense situation as well, so it builds and builds and builds.
Yeah, tenseness for me, if I'm thinking of films the last few years, is always usually a Tarantino movie, but that's down to the dialogue more than anything. In terms of action, because we get so many now, it's very difficult to carry that over. But going back to that oil tanker scene, like the opening gunshot, I'm not kidding. This film was so loud. So like deafeningly loud. I didn't want to be the guy to like have to cover his ears in the cinema, but I was getting very close at some point, and because it was so loud, I was like the soldiers, I was dreading every gunshot that was going to happen, because you were going to have that massive audio spike. So I guess it's a good thing that I almost like burst my eardrums watching this movie, because it does put you into that situation of waiting for that next gunshot but absolutely dreading it at the same time.
Yeah. It was the oil scene. That was a moment for me. You don't really get jaw-dropping moments in films nowadays, especially when they say that the next characters are going to be back on a Marvel film next year, 3 years before the films come out. When they first dropped the oil, because I completely forgot it was in the trailer until you mentioned it a minute ago. When they first mentioned oil, probably about 15 minutes before the oil scene happens, you're kind of like, oh yeah, they're covered in oil. Something could happen. And you're expecting a bomb to go into it or something like that. And then as everything fits into place at the end, and we'll get to the moment before because it's maybe my favorite moment of the film, when the bomber comes down, and this is when the soundtrack's really rising and rising, the audio's going up and up. You're kind of there like, oh my fucking god! It felt like this is it. Game of Thrones last season. Spoiler alert: Cersei Lannister. Yeah. When you clock on what's about to happen, I was literally there like, oh my fucking god, like what's happening? And then it comes down, and he got away just in time. And obviously, a bit like realistic, it's not like a real film. Like a CG film where the oil's going to spread everywhere inside 3 seconds. But it was that, that scene happened, and I think it was the combination of the soundtrack, the center of everything, of just that bomber falling into the ocean and everyone being covered in oil. It was. I was there on the edge of my seat. I've said that so many times this review, but it just if you look at the opening scene, you get tension from a man running away from a couple of people shooting him. Right at the end, when you've got like a couple of hundred people trying to escape a capsizing boat while being covered in oil, while a bomber's coming down upon them with a Spitfire chasing them in the air, and it all worked.
See, this is what I'm hoping. I mean, you've seen it twice now, so I'm guessing this is absolutely still the case, and that would be a sign of a good movie. I'm hoping when I see it a second time, when I see it a third time, that urgency is still going to be there when I see the movie, and it's not like a sort of one and done type movie. I'm expecting I still will be thrown straight into it from that opening scene, and it'll be like watching it for the first time again, which is very difficult to do with films like this when you do have that level of action and urgency throughout. Let's talk about the sea then, Mark Rylance, because this is a big part of the film and arguably the most personal. I think this is the one where you get the most characterization for the people on that boat. I'm going to give my negative, and I like how you've called him Curious George in the plan. I hate characters like this in these war-type films, how they're the plucky young kid, want to go to war, want to do good, overly enthusiastic, all that stuff. Well, we're in spoilers now. A bad thing happens and he's proclaimed a war hero, and we're meant to feel really good about him despite the fact that I hate his character. Loved Rylance's son, loved Cillian Murphy, loved everything else surrounding that, but I felt, I don't know if it was like a case of the writing or if it was the performance or a combination of both, but I just hate that character trope of those characters like that.
Oh, he's a weird one because the first time I saw it, I was kind of, well, I kept laughing in the trailers that I'll be useful, sir. Like,
yeah,
I think you knew what you were going to get from that first trailer. And I always thought it'd be Mike Ryance's son or like another one, but he obviously wasn't, and we'll get to that later. But on the rewatch, I mean, obviously he dies, and I don't want to say it's brutal, but he's one of the characters that you don't think would die, especially when he's on the boat, B, he's the young kid. And the way in which everything happens in their storyline, you don't think he's going to go until it obviously finally happens. And the way they do it is so... Well, obviously we're in spoilers, so all the soldiers are on the boat, and he says, watch out down there, my friend's there. And he goes, he's dead. And it just hits you like, this kid's died. A, it's off screen. B, it's during a climactic scene as well. And it just happens not out of nowhere because you know something really bad's going to happen, but it just kind of hits you that everyone's now safe and you think you're all right inside that your tension, but then you just get sunk. And although I didn't like him, I was still about sorry for him. And then on the second rewatch, when he was talking in the film, he always said that I didn't notice this in the first one, noticed in the second. I don't know how, to be fair, but probably because it wasn't important at the time because you were focused on the other stuff. He said, I never really did anything at school. I wasn't that good at that. I want to be in the local newspaper. As
soon as he said that, I knew he was going to go at some point. I didn't know how, but as soon as he said that, I was like, okay.
But because I didn't clock on from the first viewing of that, rewatching on the second one, it didn't make me tear up at all, but it kind of hit you like, okay, yes, maybe it is cliched, but because you had a vague bit of backstory that he didn't do anything at school, he didn't do anything in his life, that he just wanted to come out and help someone, that made it slightly more. And not to call him like an idiot, but because he's got that vibe of not necessarily being like an intelligent person anyway, it kind of makes it a bit more tragic with the sections what happens with him. But I guess you can't really talk about Curious George without Cillian Murphy playing the shivering soldier.
God.
The fact he doesn't have a name, he is simply this shivering soldier. He is not what I expected him to be at all. I mean, in the trailers, he's got the lines like, turn the ship around. It says it really funnily.
You should be at home. That was my favourite line.
Yeah, they're great lines, and he is great in this. And he's basically playing a soldier with, I've said it already those times, why do I always forget? Shell shock.
Yeah.
And we meet him sitting on the top of a sunken British vessel, literally on the spinning rotor things. Why do I always forget what they're called? Propeller, that's it. And then he survives, and he's just literally shivering in the corner. He's not doing anything. And there's some classic tropes where they lock the shell shock person in a room, and there's a brilliant scene where a couple of people laughed. I don't know if you meant to, but I kind of did. When the door's locked, he's banging for ages, they open, he's gone. And it just felt like a Batman moment where suddenly he's appeared behind them on top of the deck. And that obviously leads to an instance where he tries to basically commandeer the boat from the BFG. Why do I always call Mike Vance the BFG? I haven't even seen the BFG.
He is the BFG now.
He's such a nice guy though. Like, he's just paying himself. And George tries to help out, and the second rewatch confirmed his death, where Cillian Murphy elbows him in the head. He smacks his head down on a wooden table and falls backwards down the stairs, and that leads to him. What hit me more is obviously straight away that he's got a bleeding head. He's probably not going to make it. Normally in these type of films, they say that and they just slowly die. Where for once they not necessarily change the stakes, but with him, they cut back to him later on, and he goes, come back on the mast. I'll be on the sea. He goes, no. He's like, I can't see, and you're like, oh wow, like you expect him to die, and you thought because he's gone blind, you think that's it, that's his injury, and then when they hit you later that he's dead, it's even not necessarily worse, but I don't know. It was a very odd choice. I didn't think he'd be the one that died, to be fair. Yeah. But they did. But it was a nice little round of the story. But rewatching it a second time, I felt more emotional, even though the stakes were higher the first time. Not having that tension made me able to take in the emotion of the film, and I did feel that with George, although he's not a character I particularly liked too much, but I liked the story arc.
There was enough there for him still. I agree with that, and it is a nice moment at the end when he does. The character arc's complete and he does get his name in the paper, but it was more the trope than anything. Yeah. Going back to Cillian Murphy, he's without a doubt one of the standouts in this film. I thought he played the whole shell-shocked persona of a soldier incredibly well. And there was that unpredictability to him, that dangerous quality to him. I mean, he kills George in the film ultimately, but I like that the conflict that his character establishes. So you've had George who's been knocked out, bleeding from the head. And it's that inner turmoil of Mark Rylance's character where he's like, do I continue on this mission to save as many people as I can at Dunkirk? Or do I turn back now, probably get some medical aid and be able to save George? And you can see that he is suffering with that dilemma, but he is very commanding and authoritative in that, no, this is what we need to do. This is the right thing to do. We need to save as many people as possible. This is the right thing. It's kind of like the whole Batman, some people deserve to have their faith rewarded moment, where at the end where you have Cillian Murphy, who you can tell is genuinely concerned and upset of what he's actually done and what he's probably capable of, where he says, is the boy okay? You must ask it about 2 or 3 times in the movie. And at the end, Mark Rylance's son lies and says, yeah, he'll make it. And you can see this, this thankfulness wash over him, like, oh, great, that's fantastic. I really liked how they played that. It's a nice little moment, and it does tie everything together, because ultimately Cillian Murphy's character, you could see him as a bad guy because he killed George, but he is a victim. He is a victim of the war psychologically. And Mark Rylance's character says it in the film, where he says he might not be the same again. This might be how he is from now on. It's a really tragic portrayal of the realities, the psychological effects of veterans in wars.
Yeah, and with the Cillian Murphy characters, he's objective, but you don't know he's shell-shocked outright, and seeing that made such difference. And I feel that, even the story of the son, that when he first asks, is he okay? He goes, no. Would you say no thanks to you? Did he say that or something like that? Yeah. And obviously he realized later on in the film that the right thing to do is to tell him that he is fine, because he can clearly see, I think, when he first tells him the boy's not right, he kind of goes back to being shivering, and you can tell like he's a bit upset with it and everything. But it was a bit different because you didn't really expect that. When he first got killed, I thought, oh, the son's going to lose it, he's going to hit him or something like that. But the story of the son sort of realizing what he's got to do in this situation, the nod from Mark Rylance, knowing it was the right thing, it just added more levity to the scene. And throwing it back, this was fictional. There might not have been a shivering soldier punch and kill a kid, but there would have been a lot of people suffering. There's even a couple of other guys, they don't want to go below deck when they're first come on. Eventually, Mark Rylance says, like, you can either go below deck or you can get off my boat and I can go save someone else. And the guy eventually goes down. It's there moments where this is a real story. This did have happen. This would have affected many, many people. I, for one, imagine being on a U-boat, or no, sorry, not a U-boat, being on like a destroyer, and they previously going back to the beach, if they locked them inside, and then the missile shoots them, and these guys, they definitely don't want to be underwater in case anything happens, and we see that with these guys, and that was a kind of great effect with it. But no, one thing I want to say with Mark Rylance, I love to chat about his backstory very quickly, but I guess I can say the first bit of interweaving of the plot happens in the sea storyline, where the second pilot, Tom Hardy, basically crashes, and it turns out that the sea guys save him. I basically think he's Ewan McGregor Jr. He is Scottish. He has the accent. He's got the very, very bright blue eyes. When I first saw the film, I thought this pilot was Ewan McGregor. It was one of the best kept quiet, sort of acting things of all time. And then he takes his mask off later, and he looks nothing like Ewan McGregor.
Yeah.
But going back to the tenseness and just about the interweaving, in the air storyline, we see him go down, and we see him wave his hand at Tom Hardy, like, okay, he's fine. Tom Hardy waves, as he always does, and flies off. And then the reality is, when he's crashed, he's waving because he can't get out. And I think he's using his flare gun as a punching device to try and get the roof. It's a cliche. But because of how intense this film is, thinking he was safe, then realizing he's completely not okay, and then Mark Rylance got to rush him. The best line of the entire film in terms of delivery was when the son's like, the chute didn't come out, he's probably dead. And Mark Rylance literally screams like, well, maybe we can save him. And the reason that hit me so much more in the second viewing of the film was because we learned the tragic backstory later on, that his son was an RAF pilot, his other son died a couple of weeks into the war. Knowing that, going into that scene where he's literally screaming because he knows the situation, an RAF pilot's gone down, he's going to save him. That adds so much more to it that's going to help repeat viewings and stuff like that. But again, the intensity of a crashed Spitfire, and he's almost drowned, they've got to get him off. But I love it in these kind of films, and I know it's very different, but when I first saw Avengers, when you slowly had people meeting each other for the very first time that you followed in their own separate stories, obviously they had 4 films before theirs, but this was like, you've had like maybe 40 minutes before the pilot meets them. It's like, oh, the pilot's all right, but he's with these guys now. And obviously by the time he gets to the end of the film, everyone's kind of looped in. But I thought it was a really cool moment because we knew we were going to get 3 storylines, but I didn't think they'd intervene as much as they did.
Yeah, and I think once this comes out on Blu-ray, DVD, there's going to be a very interesting experiment that someone's going to do.
I think I've seen a lot of people say they want to do it.
Like the whole Memento thing, putting it back in the correct order. I think someone's going to do it with this. And, I'll watch that because structure is a big thing with the movie, and I'd be interested to see how it plays out in real time. But I do think the structural shift of this movie just takes it to like that next level. It keeps you thinking, it keeps you guessing. Like that moment you said when the pilot does wave, I think everyone thought that, like, yeah, I'm okay, I'm good. And then, that would have been a fucking horrible way to go, like just drowning in general. But in those confines of a cockpit of a plane, that'd just be horrendous. Going back to the whole boat thing as well, when you were saying that people don't want to go below deck, I completely forgot. Years ago on a school trip, we stopped on the HMS Belfast, which was constructed for World War II. And that wasn't like during any conflict or any war or anything like that, but the conditions are really oppressive and horrible. So I can understand, especially people that have been in that environment for a long time, not wanting to go below deck in case something did happen where they wouldn't get out. So yeah, just when you mentioned that, like, I know we're talking about the Mark Rylance stuff, but I wanted to go back to that. That did make me think of that as well.
It was just everything about it, and you do feel scared knowing you're at home in a cinema. not, and this sounds stupid, but like you said earlier about being like a 4D experience, on some of those scenes, certainly in the boat scene on the beach stuff where it's black and it kind of cuts to them lingering up and stuff, you feel like you're there with them. You've got the gurgling of the water. It is like that, and you know it's a great thing about it. But if we're talking, should we go on to the air stuff?
Talk about the air stuff.
To me, the best has been saved till the last. First up, there's a Michael Caine cameo.
Yeah, I read this literally 2 minutes before we went live.
Oh, really?
You were guessing like that he would be in there somewhere, but we were thinking like actually in the movie. I didn't pick up on that at all, so I'm going to be looking out for that in the second viewing.
When the airplanes take off, they get a call from an RAF base, and it's Michael Caine on the other end of the phone, and he's telling them like, you've got like 1 hour of fuel, you get to go back to the base, blah blah blah. The second I heard that voice, my mate was like, "That's fucking Michael Caine, that is." And it did not. You don't forget his voice, and you know it's Nolan film. He will do whatever he can to be in a Nolan film, and I was getting more worried by the time this film would come out that he was on no official IMDb stuff. But no, he was the RAF guy on the phone. I know to some people that's like that's probably nothing. It's minuscule, but as a Nolan fan, like the Michael Caine thing is now a part of it. Even in Interstellar, where he had like I think 3 scenes.
Yeah,
he's always said he will be in any film Christopher Nolan wants him in, and he would happily go into any film. And the thing is with this, and I guess it's a good thing, Nolan's not writing the film to have a cameo by a friend in.
Yeah,
you know that the reason he hasn't got a physical presence is because he obviously wasn't needed in this film. And you know one thing. I guess this goes off on a tangent slightly, but notice that there's been no politics in this film. He didn't want like a war room with all the politicians discussing what to do with Dunkirk. You know, if he did that, Michael Caine would have been in there playing a politician. Whereas with this, okay, this is focused on the beach. We're kind of in any of these, but the guy on the phone, the RAF, he's got him in. His lines are important. He's setting their story with, you know, you've got 1 hour of fuel. I think he says that. Then you've got blah, blah, blah. And it is important you stay strafe and blah, cover all that stuff. But the Michael Caine cameo was great. I really liked that. It's just nice to see him in another Christopher Nolan film.
Yeah, I'm going to be looking out for that now, that scene. Like, you know, Tarantino has Samuel Jackson. I like that Christopher Nolan now. Well, he has many people, really. He has, like, the entire supporting cast of the Batman films in this. But it's nice to see that Michael Caine, you know, gets an appearance in all of his movies. The dogfights in this movie, we've already talked about it in spoiler-free a little bit, but what I liked about this is that although this is very much sort of like an action movie, it cheapens it when I say an action movie, but you know what I mean, like action intensity all the way through. It's not just like get them in the sights, shoot, boom, explosion, get them in sights. You really see how long it takes. Like there's like he's trying to take down one pilot for a good chunk of this movie. And, you know, it's the skilled pilots, it's the weaving in and out, it's trying to get lined up, it's trying to get the perfect shot. And it doesn't happen all the time. These things take time, and it's the constant race against time with the fuel. We can talk about the structure of time in a minute if you like, because that does play a big part in all of these storylines. But I like how they did take their time with that. It felt like it felt like a real dogfight. It didn't feel like a Hollywood movie, over-stylized dogfight. It felt like something you would see firsthand in World War II.
Yeah, it's not like Battlefield where you get in a plane and just fly around for like 10 minutes, taking out 4 people, dropping bombs. It was, you know, it was, like I said, seeing them 3 Spitfires lined up together was honestly one of the best shots I've ever seen in the film. Just the noise, everything about it was just beautiful. And yes, we've seen them in the trailers, the odd dogfight, and we do get the shot where, you know, he does shoot. He doesn't kill it in the trailer, but the trailer finishes as he gets in the line of sight. I love in this film like how tactical they were, that whenever he'd try and shoot, like he was missing most of them. It doesn't take one bullet to take down a fighter as well. It's not like that. It's you got to get a couple, get the engines, whatnot. But the dogfights, but to me, the highlight of this film. I wouldn't say they were the most intense or the tension moments, but they had their moments of that. But when you've got Tom Hardy, literally his performance is his eyes, and it's, you know, I mean, Chris did an interview and he said Tom Hardy's got more talent in one eye than most actors do.
Yeah, I will say, like, he's probably just like the Nolan films, but he's one of those actors that would be willing to act behind a mask the entire movie. He's not one of these actors like Will Smith who has, you know, he's required face time throughout most of it. No. Like Tom Hardy will gladly do that, and he still is able to project his performance through that. I thought he was great in this movie. Tom
Oh,
Hardy?
I absolutely loved him. Again, another master role. What he's done, Bane, kind of Mad Max, I guess you could say. Obviously,
Probably has about the same dialogue as Mad Max. In all honesty,
yeah,
like,
not many lines, which is great though, because in what I also one thing I want to say is that in a lot of old sort of films you see, especially war ones, if there's ever like RAF fighters and stuff, like they'll take their masks off to talk to each other on the radio, whereas in this, it's nope, they're going to do their masks once they've started combat, and that's going to be that for the film. That's how we're going to do it. But just seeing these dogfights and how long it takes to get one or two, and how much of a big deal it is. The fuel stuff, you never really think of fuel for like an aeroplane, especially in a dogfight, but back then that was a major thing, because that's the difference between dying in the ocean and actually making it back to your base. And I loved how they handled that. That was the intensity for this storyline, was that he's got to keep his fuel up with a broken fuel gauge, especially when the second pilot goes down. But one thing you want to talk about is, it's so hard to talk about dogfights because there's more, but my moment of the entire film, which is my America moment, is right at the end before the oil, where the bomber's on its way to take out Mark Rylance, the boat, all of them. And then Tom Hardy, after taking out the other two fighters, Tom Hardy's Spitfire just flies into the line of sight. It was without doubt like the most patriotic moment I've ever seen in the film. Just followed by just holding the bloody fire buttons on the Spitfire bullets, going for it, taking it down. That was the moment of the film. That was the pinnacle of all of it meeting together. Obviously, you then had the oil scene, which kind of killed the tension back up and go mental, but just that moment of him flying, and I think that's when the soundtrack really boomed and kicked in. Yeah. It's like a Mad Max silence, like Christopher Nolan's version. But wow, I just seeing them on the screen, you just got to kind of think like, well, who else would have done that? Who would have gone for cheap crap CGI rather than, I mean, not even models. I mean, so the production of this, they did for some planes. In some shots, they used giant sort of remote control ones. I'd imagine they were probably on the beach scenes rather than the air stuff, but. You know, even they were doing that. I think there was drama when I remember during filming that some historians were moaning because Christopher Nolan bought a plane off a museum for this film, strapped the IMAX to it, crashed it in the sea. And you do see that in this, because when they do a shot of one of the jets going down, you see its wings and stuff depart in the sea. And break, sorry. But the air stuff was great. And what I do want to say, yes, Tom Hardy saved the day and he ran out of fuel. I have seen some people complaining online that because he ran out of fuel and the propeller stops, you're meant to go straight back down like that. That's how films have done it. That's how games have done it. The real life is called a dead stick landing, where you run out of fuel, but you essentially glide. Yeah, and it's very normal. You're just not actually propelling in the air. Similar to when you park, your car runs out of fuel, you're running on your fumes for a bit, and then you're going to eventually stop. People complained. I've seen people on Twitter complain. I just turned off the internet before I went mental, because he can do it. And there's another great moment where the final plane is going to kill everyone because you get this moment where home has come. Hans Zimmer has a rendition of a very famous classical song, kind of being played on screen, and then everything's cheery. You get the oil scene. They're all safe. Everything's great. Then you get the beach and. Why do I forget Kenneth Branagh's name? He turns around and you just know something's happening. All the soldiers are lining up. They're all crapping themselves. And you just see one final plane coming down on them. And then you just get a gliding Spitfire just take out and just glides past the screen. And I guess it's the most Tom Hardy thing you can have. But what I will say of his character is that I love the fact that obviously he gets taken prisoner of war because he had to land it in the German territory. It was like a great ending because although he lives, you know, it's not happy days for him for the foreseeable 5 years and more if he makes it to the end of that. But I don't even know where to start. Like that, it was just amazing.
There was a moment where, because he's really struggling to take out that last German bomber, there was a moment where I thought that he was just going to put the machine gun aside and just sacrifice himself, just career straight into
drive into it. Yeah.
I'm glad they didn't do that, although I think, because I like ultimately where the character ends up. It's a horrible ending for the character, but it's the whole dead stick landing thing. See, you know a lot more about World War stuff than I ever will. I'm not a World War scholar by any stretch of the imagination. So I thought that his stick was jammed, and when he had to keep like yanking it back, that's not. I'm guessing it was meant to just come straight down, but it was faulty or something. Right? No, is that how they actually are?
Back then, they just had to keep manually pulling until the wheels actually got to the landing stage. But I guess for not intense, but they tried to do it just so that he got it just in time.
Yeah.
But yeah, back then, nowadays, obviously, they probably I guess they just switch a button and the wheels come down. But
Yeah.
back then, it was all obviously manual, then pulling to get it down each little stop. But
Mhm.
it was just like a great fun. And I think it's not I guess it is the final scene, but even with before the train stuff, but him just flying across is the most obvious bit of CG, that they've got the background of the village and models, well, obviously a real Spitfire, but it was a really cool seeing him fly at the beach just to see how long it was and all that kind of stuff. And yes, it did make for obvious CGI, but for the finale of the beach scenes at Dunkirk, it was one of the better ones. And obviously, you had the probably one of the few comedy moments where Kenneth Branagh saves the private who fell asleep and missed the entire occupation.
Yeah, but that shot of Tom Hardy flying over is it's so difficult because I've only seen it once, and talking about this now, it just makes me want to see it all more. But it's definitely one of my favorite parts of the film. The bit where all the ships from home show up.
Yeah.
It reminded me, it's completely different, but like the Rohirrim charge from Lord of the Rings, like it did give me that same sense of awe and like finally they're here, come to the rescue. But that shot with Tom Hardy flying, and again, this shows how expressive he is as an actor. It's like his congratulations, like they're congratulating all like the ships showing up from home to rescue them, but they're absolutely applauding him as well. And he knows what's going to happen. Like he knows that he's probably going to get kidnapped because he is going to crash behind enemy lines. But it's like he's taking in that moment, he's taking in the adoration, and just the fact that they've won, essentially. It's a very awkward win, but you know what I mean? They've achieved what they set out to do. He played a big part in that. And now he's going to be in some prisoner of war camp for many years' time and have a horrible life and probably not make it out of it. I do want to talk about the very, very last shot, but we'll talk about that. We need to talk about the train sequence now. One thing that I really do like that they hit on, and I completely forgot about it, is that ultimately it is evacuation. It isn't a surrender, but it's, you know, they're fleeing from something. And when they return home, Harry Styles' character, he can't look people in the eye. He's really angry about it. It says like people don't want to look at us. They don't see us as heroes. They see us as cowards. But when you do have that moment in the end when he taps on the window and he's got the beers, that was just, I love that moment. That entire train sequence I thought was amazing.
Yeah, it was a nice wrap up.
One thing I will say though, really quickly, because I mean you're the guy who knows World War II stuff. The whole "we shall fight on the beaches," "we shall," all that stuff. I thought that was for D-Day. Like I thought that was read out of the D-Day landing. I didn't realize it was for Dunkirk. So
I wasn't going to be the one that lies. I didn't know until I watched this film. I think it was doing like June like 1940. And obviously this film just finishes in June 1940, so yeah. I always thought, I knew it was early in the war, but I didn't know it was during Dunkirk, because what my kind of dad says, well, he goes, it would have been too obvious and too cheesy for them to have inserted an audio bite of Churchill. It wouldn't have suited the film at all. It would have dampened it. So having it read off a newspaper and then even get the interruption, like, well, what did you say? Like, it just felt a bit more real, but it was a cheesy train bit, like they always are in these war films. The hero is welcome, and you know, Harry Styles, like, one thing I will say about him is that he starts off as an all right guy in terms of his character morality. He's kind of one of them. Then he's like outright villainous when he's got the gun at the French flag, like, you're a fucking crow. And then he's like, no, he's a frog. And like, he's just visibly angry, and, you know, balls on Nolan. Fair, the risk of casting him has paid off. And we say there's a risk. Deep down, I've had faith in him the entire time. I think I've said that before, that he doesn't really make wrong steps in casting. And he did so recently, he didn't know who One Direction were before it was announced. But I didn't expect Harry Styles to, even though I knew this was it's a no film. You wouldn't think Harry Styles would be the one pointing the gun at the French guy. You think it'd be the way around, that all the directions are going to scream. But credit to them, they didn't actually scream in the film. I'm sure there were probably one or two in there, but.
Did you see the article as well that Harry Styles has said that he might be a one and done in terms of his acting, that he doesn't know if it's going to be like a long-term thing. He might just end it after this. He's probably worked with Nolan and thinks it's never going to get better than that. Yeah,
it's not just that, but it's one thing I give him credit to is that if an actor on a shoot, I think Mark Ryan's the exact same about Harry Styles, that going on a Christopher Nolan film isn't the easiest of experiences for an actor, let alone it being a brand new actor who's on a war film where he's going to get thrown around quite a bit. I I mean, I don't. In honesty, I don't give a shit about Harry Styles. I know I cared because he was in this film, and now if he wants to be in other films, then he can. Unless he's going to be in a Christopher Nolan film, I don't really care. But I will give him credit the fact that he did want to go into acting. He took it seriously. He didn't walk off into some crappy teen drama about a rom-com or some nonsense like that. He went straight into a gritty war film, and I've got a lot of respect for that, for him trying it and succeeding it too.
There's really only the very final scene, the final shot, I should say, because one thing I do look forward to, and this isn't a slight against Nolan at all, don't get me wrong, I love his endings to his films, just how they're edited, the montages, I love all that stuff. So although I didn't want this movie to end, and you know, I wanted it to go that extra 5 minutes longer, when it did get to the ending, I was completely wrapped up in it. However, they kind of did an Inception style ending on this one, and I don't know if it worked. So you have the great shot of the Spitfire on fire, and you know, it's this lingering, slow zoom in shot, and I think that should have been the ending shot. And then it cuts to him just like closing the newspaper, like literally 2 frames. It's not even a full second of a shot, and then cut to black. And it felt like, you know, the editor like dragged a clip in, forgot about it, and cut it too short, and it's just kind of like left in the cut. I'm gonna have to watch it a second time to see if I have as big a problem with it as I had the first time.
I know what you mean. I think they probably didn't want to end it on the spit from the fire. It would have been the better ending because, you know, I kind of realized, I should have known before, but I kind of clocked on during this film that, wait, Nolan does a montage in every film, like, well, not even a montage, at least like a speech or something like that. And obviously the Churchill speech into even with characters, which I liked. But yeah, when it cuts, but I think because he was the lead character, it starts and they probably went to finish with him, and the whole probably on the downer of the prisoner of war situation. I don't know, but it was like jading. I don't know if that's the point of it, because one thing I noticed editing at the start, when the text first comes up for the intro stuff, they cut away from some of the shots very, very quickly. I think it's intentional. So when you first get the "you're here, we are here" thing with the posters, they literally cut 1 or 2 seconds and like, you got to read it quickly. You should do anyway, but it's one of those where, yeah, I think they probably want to start and end it with him sort of closing the book.
Yeah. There's literally, you talked about cutting away from a shot there. There's one last thing I wanted to talk about with this film. It was the shot from the teaser trailer, which was a shot
smiling extra.
The smiling extra.
It was cut from the film.
Yes. It cuts away just because I pinpointed the guy because I memorized which one it is, and he begins to smile and it cuts, and then it cuts to after it. I'm really annoyed about that because I wish that was an unbroken shot, because before I noticed that in the teaser trailer, Simpler Times, I thought it was a great shot, and I wish we could have had that one unbroken shot of it. Clearly, like, Nolan noticed that too. Like, whoever that guy, like, fuck that guy. Like, why would you do that? You're on set for a Nolan film, you're doing a war film, show up, fucking act as you meant to, and don't try and stick out and have some kind of legacy after this movie. Yeah, so but he just cut around it, and I thought that was quite funny when I noticed that. We could probably talk about this film a whole lot more than we have, and when we see this a bunch of other times, get it on DVD, maybe we'll talk about it again at some point. We did want to do reviews on all. I don't know how long we've been going for. I really don't. We'll have to check afterwards. But what I will say is we did want to do a review for all of Nolan's films in the lead up to this. We had a very packed month. July has been crazy for films, and we did our Spider-Man reviews as well, and we really didn't have enough time to do it. However, talking about this today, I think at some point we are going to have to go through Nolan's filmography. I think that'll be a really good discussion series to have on those.
Yeah, especially when August is a very, very quiet month. But no, Nolan, I mean, like I said, one of the reasons I haven't seen, because people, why can he be a favorite actor of some of his films? It's like, well, I've waited to do a marathon to watch following Insomnia, and the time will come, and hopefully isn't this, because we even said in a couple of episodes, like, oh yeah, stick with us in July because we're going to do all the Nolan films, and we didn't. But just rewatching this, like, yes, technically we've done an Inception review, but it was so long ago, like, it wouldn't feel right, and I'd much rather have like Tayte or Tom on, or someone else as well, because now we've seen this. Doing a kind of Nolan retrospective video would be absolutely phenomenal in terms of looking at all of his films across, maybe, I don't know, but there's potential for us to do more Nolan stuff. I hope we do, especially when normally I think he said, you know, someone asked him what's next Battle of Britain film, which I would probably cry if that was announced. It won't, though. He says, "No, I'm going to take a holiday." He goes because he says once he gets to work on a film, he doesn't not work for like a couple of years until it comes out, which I'm not surprised with. He's a very traditional director. He has weekends off from filming, from editing. He works Monday to Friday. He is that kind of guy. He knows the drill. But yes, no, anything Nolan's great, and I'd love to do something like that.
Yeah. We've talked about this film to death. You know our thoughts on it now. Absolutely go and see this movie. But now it's like the sad thing. After every Nolan film, we begin our wait, however many years, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it's going to be for his next film. He is one of those directors. It might be Bond. It might be Bond. Who knows? Who knows? It's like Tarantino with me. Like I'm always looking forward to his next movie. Christopher Nolan has reached that point now as a director. Yeah, so that'll do it for our review on Dunkirk. Be sure to comment, subscribe, let us know what you thought of the movie. Did you enjoy it? Didn't you enjoy it? Any favourite scenes? Anything you like regarding Dunkirk or Christopher Nolan in general? Please do drop us a comment. In terms of what's coming up on the show, on our channel, next weekend, I believe we're doing a review. Not sure who's going to be on that one, for Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets. So we've hit our good films now. I think we're going to hit some pretty bad ones for the month of August. But check back next weekend for that. There'll be a bunch more reaction videos. I've recorded literally about 5 or 6 with Tayte today. I'll be getting those edited over the course of the next few days. We'll have our news show tomorrow night. We're going over all the Comic-Con news. And what are we doing Tuesday? We're doing something Tuesday as well.
I'm doing on The Rock's TV series. And
sorry, you cut out there for a second.
Sorry,
yeah, you cut out
just in case anyone else missed it, I've got new Rockets going to come out on Tuesday. Ballers season 3 airs tonight, which is a fantastic show, which obviously he's a producer of and he stars in. I'll be getting out a review of season 1 and 2 as a Rockathon episode, so that's coming back because obviously I had the hiatus when I was away. What else do we have? Thursday we've got normal news tomorrow with this Comic-Con special, so me and you'll be talking the trailers, posters, main news to come out from it. Just a brief summary. I think it's been a very disappointing Comic-Con in terms of major announcements and whatnot, but that will be packed tomorrow. Thursday, we've got normal news. And then just the usual stuff. Like I say every video now, we've got stuff coming out almost daily. It's hard. It's hard to know what's coming. I think we meant to have a Best Picture coming up anytime soon, so that would be nice. But in case not, just like, comment, subscribe. I think Tate's favorite words, hit the bell for notifications.
Yeah. Share, comment, all that good stuff. Yeah, until the next video, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.